Welcome to the American Rescue Plan, American Indian Resilience and Education, otherwise known as ARP-AIR 2021 Grant Competition Pre-Application Webinar number 2. This is the second in our series of 2 pre-application webinars. This one will be focused on the relationship between the absolute priority, selection criteria, and the application. As we get started today, I do want to go over just a few logistical pieces. So all of the participants will be muted today. However, we do want to hear from you. So please post any questions that you have as we're going throughout into the chat box. If you're not familiar with where the chat box is located, for most of you, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a little talk bubble. If you click on that, that will open up a chat box and you can pop all your questions in there. We do have preset stops throughout where we'll do some Q&A. So just know we're not ignoring your question, but we are grabbing it and holding it for that Q&A time. So make sure and pop those questions in. If you're on a mobile device, you may need to swipe over from right to left to be able to locate your chat box. Now, this webinar is being recorded. That recording is going to be posted on the OIE website at the link that you could see there on your screen, and that will be shortly posted in the chat box for you. If you missed the first webinar, the recording of that first webinar is already up at that link. If you have any technical issues as we're going throughout today, feel free to reach out in the chat box and we're happy to help you there. Or if you get disconnected for any reason, please reach out to oie@seiservices.com so we can help you get reconnected. Today, we have a couple of folks from the Office of Indian Education who are going to be leading our discussion. Dr. Donna Sabas-Burns, the OIE Discretionary Group Leader, and primarily Shala Ortega, your ARP-AIR Program Lead and Competition Manager. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shala.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Shala Ortega. I serve as the Competition Manager for ARP-AIR. With us from OIE is Donna Sabas-Burns, Group Leader for Discretionary Team. Today's webinar is the second of the 2 pre-application webinars for this new program. And this webinar is intended to guide you through the selection criteria and the linkage between absolute priority, selection criteria, and the application. In addition, we'll use a logic model to show examples of how logic model can be used in building project narrative. In this program, the use of a logic model is required for developing project narrative that leads to intended outcomes. If a logic model is not used, applicants will not get maximum points for project design. I just wanted to highlight that so that you remember, if you do not use a logic model, you may not take advantage of the full points for project design. There is a lot of material to cover during today's webinar. I want to remind everyone that the 2 pre-application webinars we're offering for this program are intended to help applicants understand what applying for this competition involves. Neither of these 2 webinars is a substitute for thoroughly reading the Notice Inviting Application, or NIA, and the application package in their entirety. We strongly encourage you to read both documents I just mentioned before attempting to apply for this competition. There will be time for questions, as Sarah just mentioned, and during this webinar, but you don't have to wait until then. If you have any questions, enter them in the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer them during the Q&A sessions. And as Sarah just mentioned, type your chat box and the questions in the chat box and then click send. Next slide. Now, as you can see, we have a lot to cover in today's webinar. We'll take you through the eligibility, absolute and competitive preference priorities, selection criteria, relation between absolute priority, selection criteria, and the application, and the use of a logic model in building project narrative. And finally, we'll go over some resources that we have made available to you. Next slide. I want to go over the objectives for this webinar. Our objectives for today's webinar or to assist participants in understanding the eligibility requirement, absolute priority, and the competitive preference priority. Understanding the selection criteria and the relationship to the absolute priority and application. Understanding why a logic model is needed to build linkages in your project narrative, and have an opportunity to submit questions to OIE. Next slide. Now, next slide is this slide deals with the polling question, and Synergy will take you through the polling question. Sarah?
So you should magically see a poll appearing on your screen. If you're on a mobile device, again, you may need to swipe over to be able to locate the poll. And if you could just answer for us, what type of grantee are you representing today? Are you a tribal educational agency, a consortium of TEAs, so more than one TEA working together, or neither of those are applicable to you, in which case you'll select none of the above? And y'all are very good at this. You're fast fingering in your answers quite quickly. I'm going to give you a few more seconds. There's a few more people still responding. Right now, we're at about 80% tribal educational agency, with one consortium on today and a few that are none of the above. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end our poll and share our results with you so you can see we ended up landing with 79% or 42 of you representing tribal educational agencies, that one consortium, and 10 that are not one of those two. You are a different type of entity. Thanks for responding, and away we go.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So let's go back to the webinar. Now here we're gonna, the next few slides, we're gonna cover an overview of this new program and the grant competition. Next slide. And please note that today's webinar is the second of the two sessions that cover the application information for this competition, and represents only a portion of the required information about the grant competition. For full detail, be sure to read the notice inviting applications, or NIA, and the application package in their entirety. Remember to follow instructions on grants.gov and processes such as DUNS and SAM. These two webinars are recorded as Sarah mentioned, and the recordings will be posted on the OIE website for you to access. Next slide. So what I'd like to do is go over the purposes of this new program. The purposes of the ARP-AIR program are to support tribal education agencies or tribal educational agencies or TEAs in the provision of direct services to Indian children and youth. Projects must include one or more of the activities authorized under Section 6121C of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, as amended ESEA. And then you see two links on your screen, and these are the two links you can kind of use to access the 6121C activities at your leisure. Next slide. So then in the next few slides, we're gonna go over the eligibility and other particulars of this program. Next slide. Let's start with the eligibility issue. And go over who's eligible to apply. As you can see, tribal education agencies or tribal educational agencies, TEAs, including a consortium of such TEAs, are eligible to apply. If you're applying as a consortium or a group, we use those two terms interchangeably here, be sure to read the regulation we have included here for information about group applications. I'm just going to mention a couple of them, but a fuller description can be accessed through 34 CFR 75-127 through 129 for group applications. Those couple of points I want to make are that there can only be one TEA as the lead applicant. So if you're thinking of applying as a group or a consortium, there can only be one lead TEA. And the other point is that a group agreement which explains the responsibilities of each member of the group must be included with the application. Those were just 2 points that I am highlighting here. There's more to it if you're applying as a group, and the way you can access to find out more about it is use the regs I just pointed under the note and find out more about it. Next slide. So we're going to continue with the eligibility issue, this time covering the group more. So what we want to do is see, so the question here is who is eligible to apply and whether the group can apply. And again, just a reminder that competitive preference priority points apply to novice TEAs only. We're using the term novice here. I just wanted to make sure that that's understood. If you're applying as a consortium of TEAs, your lead applicant must be a novice TEA in order to take advantage of the competitive preference priority points. So the term novice TEA applies to lead applicants only, and the terms novice and new potential applicants, they're basically the same thing, and they're being used interchangeably here. So can multiple TEAs apply as a group? Yes. A group of TEAs might choose to apply together with one TEA as the lead applicant. And that for the competitive preference priority to apply in this case, the lead applicant must be a novice, like I said, a novice TEA. Novice here is defined as a TEA that has not had an active discretionary grant from the U.S. Department of Education in the past 5 years. So if you're claiming as a novice, then you have to make sure that, that you have not had an active discretionary grant from the U.S. Department of Education in the past 5 years. If applying as a group, only the lead TEA must be novice in order for the group applicant to receive or take advantage of the competitive preference priority points. And in this case, the lead TEA is the one applying on behalf of the group. Next slide. Okay, now the definition for the tribal education agency. What is it? And here's how TEA is defined here. Tribal educational agency, or TEA, as defined in section 6132 of the ESEA, is the agency, department, or instrumentality. And by the way, instrumentality is just another word for department, office, or agency, of one or more federally recognized or state recognized Indian tribes that is primarily responsible for supporting tribal students' elementary and secondary education. And I just want to point out something here, that if you have an office and you have maybe scholarships that you issue or handle through that office, unless you are primarily responsible, unless that office is primarily responsible for supporting tribal students' elementary and secondary education, you will not be considered a TEA. You wouldn't fit this definition. So just be careful, take a look at the definition, see if it fits where you are, and if it does, and it does meet the definition, then you're eligible as a TEA. This definition is also in the notice inviting application, the NIA, and it is how the Department of Education defines what a TEA means. Next slide. Now, I'd like to give a snapshot of what this competition entails this year. And here's a table. Let's start with eligible applicants. Again, TEAs, including the consortium of TEAs. And there is a note here that says, if you're applying as a consortium or a group, the same thing, that you should consult the regs mentioned here for information about group applicants. Estimated funds available, $19,800,000, and that's to cover 3 years because this is a multi-year program. It's a one-time program, so the 19 million plus is going to cover the 3 years. Estimated range of awards is $300,000 to $500,000 for each 12 months budget period. So if you're applying and budgeting, you want to show, well, this is the estimated amount. You want to have a budget for each 12 months of the budget period. Estimated average size of the award, $400,000 for each 12 months budget period, same thing. The period, project period is up to 36 months, 3 years, basically. That's what we're saying here. Estimated number of awards, we're hoping to issue 16 awards for each 12-month budget period. What that means is that there are going to be 16 grantees, hopefully, and these are multi-year projects. So it's going to be 16 grantees that have 3-year grants, each one 12 months each year. Application deadline is September 13. And here, if you notice, we'll put not only the date, but also the time, and it's in Eastern time. Be careful because most of you are not in Eastern time. Just pay attention to that, and the time zone change when you're applying. Don't wait the last minute day to apply. Just give yourself enough time. Next slide. All right, I'd like to go over the background a little bit. ARP Air is a brand new one-time discretionary grant competition that was authorized under Section 110061 of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, or known as ARP, to provide awards to tribal education agencies for activities authorized under Section 6121C of the ESEA in order to meet the urgent needs of the students in response to the coronavirus 2019, also known as COVID-19 pandemic. So it's a brand new program. It's a one-time program, and the purpose of it was to offer the services we just covered. Those activities include a broad range of direct services. It's a direct service program to Indian children and youth, their teachers, and their families. So it's not just about children, it's their teachers and families. And when we get to those activities I just mentioned, you'll see where that, how that actually applies. The department conducted a meaningful tribal consultation on April 26, 2021 to get feedback from tribes and to incorporate the feedbacks we received into the new program. So the program was designed with feedback that we received from the tribes. Now, if you want to read more about the tribal consultation we consulted, you can use the URL that's listed here to access it and read, read on your, in your free time. Next slide. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of delve into a little bit into the priorities. We try to design this program with very few requirements to keep it simple, basically. That's why we have established only one absolute priority and one competitive preference priority. That's all there is. As applicants, you must clearly identify the specific absolute priority and the competitive preference priority in the proposed project abstract. So that's where you identify what you're doing. Project abstract, you identify the absolute priority and the competitive preference priority if it applies. Next slide. I'd like to go over the absolute priority first. The absolute priority for this program is simple. It's what we named the program, American Indian Resilience in Education, or ARPA. To meet this priority, applicants must propose a culturally relevant project designed to assist and encourage Indian children and youth to enter, remain in, or re-enter school at any grade level from pre-K through grade 12. That includes at least one of the following activities from section 6121C of the ESEA. And we'll get to those activities later. Again, as applicants, you must clearly identify the absolute and competitive preference priorities of the proposed project in the project abstract section of your application. Also, because this program is designed to assist and encourage youth re-entry into K-12, students can be directly serviced through this program. So it's a direct service program, and that's what we mean when we say direct service program. Next slide. So continuing with the absolute priority, this and the next few slides give you a list of approved activities from the NIA to choose from. To make your selection, however, read the NIA carefully and make your selection from the notice inviting application. As we stated in the NIA, the activities listed in the NIA do not include all the actual activities listed under 6121C. And there are a couple of them that I need to mention. We omitted section 6121C5 from the list that we have in the NIA because we incorporated the language from 6121C into the introductory language for the absolute priority. All the more to make sure that your absolute priority is completely covered in your application project narrative. And section 6121C number 14, I think it is the number, was eliminated. We didn't include that because it is only relevant to the demonstration grant program. And so those were the two that are not part of the list of 6121C, 21C activities that are in the NIA. When making a selection from these activities, make sure that you state your selected component verbatim. So don't try to reword the activity. Make sure that you list it as is in the NIA. Do not use the number to indicate which one you choose. Now, I'm numbering these things in this presentation, but what you don't want to do is go with, well, I choose number 1 without explaining what that is verbatim. You must write the selected component word for word as written in the notice inviting application as they appear under the absolute priority section. Do not reword it or create your own selection. You can't come up with your own. It has to be one of the from one of the lists that are under the absolute priority in the NIA. To meet absolute priority, applicants must meet at least one of these components. And we're going to go over what the list is in a minute. Please keep in mind that the main purpose for making a selection here from the list is to make a connection between the component you select and how it's relevant to the proposed project and its direct connection to assisting and encouraging Indian children and youth to enter, remain in, or re-enter school at any grade level from pre-K through grade 12. I'm mentioning this here because that's your absolute priority, and the language in the absolute priority has to be interconnected with everything else you write into your application proposed project. It is critical that you make this connection very clear in your proposed project. Again, clearly identify the absolute and competitive preference priorities that the proposed project addresses in the project abstract section. Now we're going to go over the activities. Number 1, again, it's numbered here. You don't go by the number, you go by what's in the NIA. and actually the stated verbatim activities in the NIA. Number one is innovative programs related to the educational needs of educationally disadvantaged Indian children and youth. The second one deals with educational services that are not available to such children and youth in sufficient quantity or quality, including remedial instruction to raise the achievement of Indian children in one or more of the subjects of English, math, science, foreign languages, art, history, and geography. And by the way, we have foreign languages here, and that is inclusive of Native American languages, just to be clear. Number three deals with bilingual and bicultural programs and projects. Next slide. So the fourth one deals with special health and nutrition services and other related services that address the special health, social, and psychological problems of Indian children and youth. The fifth one is about comprehensive guidance, counseling, and testing services. Sixth is about early childhood education programs that are effective in preparing young children to make sufficient academic growth by the end of grade 3, including kindergarten and pre-K programs, family-based preschool programs that emphasize school readiness, screening and referral, and the provision of services to Indian children and youth with disabilities. Next slide. The seventh one is about partnership projects between local educational agencies and institutions of higher education that allow secondary school students to enroll in courses at the post-secondary level to aid such students in the transition from secondary to post-secondary education. The eighth one deals with partnership projects between schools and local businesses for career preparation programs designed to provide Indian youth with the knowledge and skills such youth need to make an efficient and effective transition from school to a high-skilled career. Next slide. Okay, so the ninth one is about programs that are designed to encourage and assist Indian students to work toward and gain interest into institutions of higher education. The 10th one deals with family literacy services. Remember, we said it's not just about students, it's about teachers and families. So family literacy services is another option. Another activity deals with activities that recognize the support and recognize and support the unique cultural and educational needs of Indian children and youth and incorporate traditional leaders. So again, number 11 deals with traditional leaders. So we're not limiting to just direct service to students. We're also including students' family, teachers, and also traditional leaders. Number 12, and the last one, is about high quality professional development of teaching professionals and paraprofessionals. So those are the 12 activities to choose from. You have to choose at least one. You're not limited to one. You can choose more. You're not going to get more points for choosing more, but it's all up to you. You have to at least choose one and then connect it to the absolute priority and the language in the absolute priority and everything else in your application. Again, when designing your proposed project, make sure that what you propose to do is culturally relevant, designed to assist and encourage Indian children and youth to enter, remain in, or re-enter school at any grade level from pre-K through grade 12, and that includes at least one of the activities listed under the absolute priority in the NIA. This program is a direct service program to allow servicing from pre-K through grade 12. So that was the list of activities in the NIA. Next slide. So I'd like to go over the competitive preference priority for a few minutes. There is only one competitive preference priority, or CPP as we call it. If you meet this priority as an applicant, you must clearly identify the competitive preference priority in the proposed project abstract section. Now, I'm emphasizing this in several places because it's very important for you to identify it so that when the reviewers are reviewing your application, they know where to go find it, and so that they don't waste time to try to search the whole application to find where it's hidden. Just identify what it is right up front in the project abstract section. Applicants that are new potential grantees or novice, those two terms are interchangeable, could receive 0 to 5 points for the CPP. To meet this priority, the qualification is that if you're a novice, you claim you're a novice, you cannot have had an active discretionary grant program from the U.S. Department of Education in the past 5 years. That's the condition. For an applicant that is a consortium of TEAs, again, I'm just repeating some of the information I gave you earlier. If the lead applicant meets this requirement, it will receive the novice points, even if not all consortium members meet the novice requirement. So if you have a consortium, you're applying as consortium, not all the TEAs in the consortium have to be novice. Only the lead applicant has to be novice for the consortium to take advantage of the CPP points. Again, to find out what the consortium or group application is, you have to consult 34 CFR 75-105 C2I. And under that, we also mentioned that we award 0 or 5 points to an applicant, also called novice applicant or new potential applicant, that has not had an active discretionary grant from the U.S. Department of Education in the past 5 years. So I'm just repeating some of that, but you can find that information I just gave you under the regs I just mentioned. Next slide. All right, this is our first go at the questions. Synergy, do we have any questions?
Yeah, so our first question, should we put October 1st, 2021 as the project start date?
We don't know what the project start date is, to be honest with you. We're just going with application deadline. So I'm gonna have to pin that question until I find out what it actually has to go in, but we don't have a date for that yet.
And then the next question was, how do they know 100% whether or not they are a novice? And we actually had a response from the legal team of that applicants can look up their past awards from the federal government, including the Department of Ed. If you go to usaspending.gov, and that's also in the chat box, and you can search that by your organization name, so the recipient name, or also by your DUNS number.
Good point, thank you.
Yeah. Next one is an instrument that is designated as the organization for the LEA to consult with under ESEA for tribal consultation meet the definition of primarily responsible for elementary and secondary education?
For that, could you put up the definition for
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, what I don't want us to do is to get too just start defining the TA outside what is actually been defined in the NIA. So pay attention to how it's defined. It's an agency, department, or instrumentality. And instrumentality basically means an office or a department that's designated by the either the federal recognized or a state recognized tribe to act as a TEA. So that's what the definition is. And if that's the case, then that office, whether it's called an agency, department, or some other office name, it must be primarily responsible for supporting tribal students' elementary and secondary education. Elementary and secondary education. primarily responsible for the services, supporting the elementary and secondary education. That's the definition. If you have an office that, does some educational activities, but they're not primarily responsible for supporting, tribal students' elementary and secondary education, that would not be considered a key.
Right.
I hope that answers the question, but that's how it is.
Yeah, thank you, Shala. And we also had a response from the legal team on this one saying, yes, exactly what you did, to follow the definition of TEA from the NIA, which is what you see on the slide here. It might be true that a tribe's TEA is the tribe's designated consultation organization for the ESEA Section 8538 consultation requirement, but not necessarily. Whichever agency, department, or instrumentality of the tribe is primarily responsible for supporting tribal students' elementary and secondary education, this is the TEA that's eligible for this particular grant.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. And then while we're on this eligibility piece, there's a question about we're an STEC school and recently won the NACTEP grant. Would that grant make them ineligible for this grant?
I'm not familiar with that grant program. We can pin that and get back to it later.
Great. Next up, for family literacy services, would policy and issue literacy fall under that priority?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
For family literacy services, and I was looking to see what that is on here, number 10.
Number 10.
Yeah, they asked if policy and issue literacy would fall under that category.
Well, again, you look at the family literacy and you have to go back and actually read the 6121C list of activities. It's not defined what family literacy is. It just says family literacy services. So you have to go back in and see how that fits in, whether you're developing policy. I don't quite know if that falls under it. We can look into your question and see if there is a broader, more complex definition of number 10, family literacy services, and get back to you. But it would have to be some sort of service to the families in terms of the literacy process.
And then the next question, and this will be the last one for this section, can you clarify what's meant by culturally relevant project? The reason I ask is that it's not clear to me how some of these activities, for example, number 9, could be framed as culturally relevant.
Well, we have to go back to the language that's in the absolute priority. If you could put that up for a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's your absolute priority and the way it was designed based on the feedback and tribal consultation we have had. This absolute priority includes culturally relevant projects designed to assist and encourage, Indian children and youth. And that's the language that was used based on one of the 12 activities that we talked about. The activity itself was incorporated into the language for the absolute priority. So there may be, activities out there that may not fit a culturally relevant project. So you would, you wouldn't choose those. And you would try to choose or select things that are actually directly addressing the absolute priority language here. I don't know if I completely answered the question here. You can repeat the question again to make sure that I didn't miss anything, but I want to make sure that we make a connection to the absolute priority and the language that's used in that to determine what kind of services you're going to select and what you're going to be doing if you're putting an application, to be clear.
And I think you did cover it. They were asking just, could we clarify what was meant by culturally relevant project, and that they weren't sure how some of the activities could be framed as culturally relevant. So I think your response that it's up to them to design a culturally relevant project. And if those activities do not fit within culturally relevant for them, that would not be applicable. So I think you answered it.
Great, thank you.
So that's the last question we're going to do in this section. If your question was not covered right now, know that we are going to hold those over to our next Q&A section.
Okay, so great. Let's go back to the presentation, and we're gonna go over. I believe we did the competitive. Yes, we did. We're on slide 24. Am I correct?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay, very good. So what we're gonna do now is shift our focus to the selection criteria and the relation between these criteria, absolute priority and its elements, and the application. There are 4 selection criteria totaling 100 points. Each selection criteria comes with several sub-criteria also with points. So when you're writing your project narrative, make sure to respond fully to each selection criteria. Do not lump your written responses for sub-criteria into one piece. Keep your written responses for each sub-criterion separately. Do not skip any of the sub-criterion. You don't pick and choose which one to write about. If you want full points or you want to be considered for 100 points, then you have to respond to all sub-criteria in all the criteria, the 4 criteria, selection criteria we listed. You must address each sub-criterion fully and separately. If you skip a selection criteria or its sub-criteria, you will lose points. Again, I'd like to remind everyone that these webinar offerings aim to give a picture of what you need to know and are not 100% comprehensive. For a complete picture, please read both the NIA and the application package in their entirety. You may have to read these 2 documents I just mentioned several times before you submit your application to make sure you understand all the requirements and know how to fully address them in your project narrative. Next slide. Now I'm going to go over the selection criteria I just mentioned. There are 4 of them. Let's start with the project design. This has half the points that you can earn in the total 100 point I just mentioned. Your quality of project design has maximum of 50 points. And these points are assigned to each sub-criterion. The more relevant and complete the written response, the more the chance of getting points during the application review process. Your proposed narrative influences the number of points you receive during the review process. To maximize your chances, try to address each sub-criterion individually and fully and separately. If do not lump your written responses for these sub-criteria together when addressing project design, be sure to demonstrate a rationale using a logic model to get the maximum 10 points under the project design. And this is a very important, we highlighted here under the 3rd section, the extent to which the proposed project demonstrates rationale as defined in the notice inviting the application. That has 10 points. So make sure you do that. Now, what do they mean by demonstrating a rationale? There's a definition for it, and it means that a key project component included in the project's logic model is informed by research or evaluation findings that suggest the project component is likely to improve relevant outcomes. So you're not just demonstrating something, you're basing it in something, some sort of research or evaluation findings that says, okay, this is what I'm gonna do, and that it's gonna improve the relevant outcome because of the research or the findings that we have included here. That's demonstrating the rationale. Next slide. Okay, and the next one is the quality of project services. Again, one of the 4 selection criteria. And under the quality of project services, notice that's B2, number 2, and it's highlighted in yellow here on my screen. You get 1 point if you explain the plan to ensure equal access and treatment for eligible participants. So there's language there that says, about the underrepresented populations based on race, color, national origin, and so on, or disability, and you get 1 point is assigned to that if you fully explain it. So I didn't want this to go unnoticed because we have the screen the way it is, it's split, and I just didn't want that to kind of be lost in the translation. So again, there are other sub criteria that you need to respond, and it's all listed here. I'm not going to go over all of them. I just wanted to point that one out for you to see. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So this one deals with the quality of project personnel, and under this selection criteria, points are given to employing members of the underrepresented group. Again, I'm just using that as an example. Number 2, under quality of project personnel on your screen, it does tell you about, gives you 3 points for addressing what's listed under number 2 for quality project personnel. That's sub-criteria number 2. Next slide. Okay, so the last one of the 4 is the quality of project management. I'm going to spend a little more time on this one because I think it's very important to make sure that you have a good understanding of what this involves. And basically, in determining the quality of the management plan for the proposed project, we consider the following factors, and there are 2 of them I just want to highlight here. The adequacy of the management plan to achieve the objectives of the proposed project on time and within budget. These are very important elements that you have to consider here, including clearly defined responsibilities, timelines, and milestones for accomplishing project tasks. Now, this sub-criterion is very important because it shows what your timelines are, what it is you're trying to do within budget, whether you're going to make it within budget, and whether it's going to be, whether you'll be able to have milestones to accomplish the project and what they are. Second one deals with the time commitments of the project director and or principal investigator. We usually call them project directors for the purpose of this discretionary program, and other key project personnel. And you want to make sure that the time that commitment that is included is appropriate for each staff you're listing and adequate to meet the objectives of the proposed project. This is a very important piece. I just wanted to make sure that people paid attention to that. So, so that if you are having, putting in an application, that you allow enough staff time to complete the project, and it's a 3-year project. Next slide. Now, we created a table here to show how these 3 components kind of interrelate. It's not like one is over on top of the other, or one is more important than the other. All 3 components are very important and interrelated. So you've got the absolute priority and selected elements, you've got the application, you've got the selection criteria. Actually, these arrows should have been, pointed in both directions, but that's all right. So that's basically what we're trying to do in the next few slides. Next slide. Oh, pardon me, just hold on 1 minute, sorry. And just to be sure, right. So we're going to take a deeper dive into areas that are interrelated to show how these 3 components come together. This is about linking the elements under each selection criteria to the absolute priority to show how you propose to provide a plan in your application that clearly specifies how the goals, objectives, and measurable outcomes will be achieved by the proposed project. So next slide. Now, before I get into the interrelatedness of all the three components we just mentioned, I just want to touch base on the program requirement. Now, this program requirement doesn't kick in unless somebody receives an award. So, but I just wanted to mention what the program requirement was. And the program requirement is basically that within 6 months after the date of the award, that's if you receive an award, the grantee must submit to the department a signed written agreement with each LEA, that's local education agencies that you're going to list, your schools you're going to work with, where students are being serviced, where participating students are enrolled. The agreement must include provisions that allow the grantee to access data necessary for the success of the project and for reporting on project objectives. This is very important. If you're awarded, then you want to make sure that you have an agreement with the LEA or LEAs that you're working with to make sure you have access to the data, student data, whatever other data you need to make the project a success. And now, agreements between tribally controlled schools and grantees are not required if the school and grantee are controlled by the same tribe. So that's an exception in this case. If the grantee and the school are the same tribe, then you don't need an agreement. We're establishing this requirement for the FY 2021 grant competition and any subsequent year in which we may make awards from the list of unfunded obligations for this competition in accordance with section 437D1 of YEPA. Next slide. Now, we're gonna get into the logic models here. And remember I said the use of a logic model is required in this program. So it is required and it's required to demonstrate when addressing the project design. If you recall, could you put up project design, the selection criteria for project design for just a minute? Let's go back to that one. I just want to make a connection there. It's not coming up.
Was this the one you wanted, Shala?
No, it's the project design, the selection criteria for project.
Oh, one moment.
And I think it's slide number, yeah, that's it. Okay, I just wanted to make a point when we were looking at the examples of logic model we're going to talk about that. And under that, using a project a logic model is required here to demonstrate. Here's number 3 under the selection criteria for project design. The sub-criterion 3 deals with the extent to which the proposed project demonstrates a rationale as defined in the NIA. That's 10 points. So going back to the slide 31, I think it was. Right. In that slide, what we're going to cover is how the logic model is required to demonstrate rationale when addressing the project design. A logic model helps you map out how your proposed project is planned from start to finish. That's very important. When you now the next few slides, we're going to go over examples of how a logic model can be used to create a clear roadmap from start to finish in your project narrative. Notice I'm using the term a logic model. I'm not telling you the logic model to be used here. We're just using a few examples and we'll get into what else you can do in terms of what other examples are available. Next slide. Here, I just wanted to, again, reiterate the definition for demonstrates the rationale, and also give you a definition for the logic model. The definition for the rationale, as we mentioned before, is a key project component included in the project's logic model that is informed by research or evaluation findings that suggest the project component is likely to improve relevant outcomes. That's what we mean by demonstrates a rationale. So it has to be based on research or evaluation findings. Now, what is a logic model? Logic model is also known as a theory of action, and it means a framework. It's a framework that identifies key project components of the proposed project. It could be, I don't know, like an active ingredient that are, hypothesized to be critical to achieving the relevant outcome, and describes the theoretical and operational relationships among the key project components and relevant outcomes. Next slide. So here what we try to do is give you a very simple example of something very complicated. Now, we have this ARP Air, and we had to create a new program. By the way, I don't want you to think that that's all it took, 4 columns to do this program. The program was much more complex to create, but we just wanted to give you a kind of a very simplified version of how a program could be created. Not that that's all it takes. And here we have a model, logic model, using the ARPA program, a logic model that shows how they say, for example, the amount of funding, $19,800,000 for 3 years, for example, and a tribal consultation could be used as your input, to start with in that column, and to build a program that is more in line with expected outcomes, such as providing culturally relevant, you look at the outcome column, providing culturally relevant projects designed to assist and encourage Indian children and youth to enter, remain in, or re-enter school at any grade level from pre-K through grade 12. This is the language we used for the absolute priority. That was the outcome. The input is, here's how much money we have, here's the tribal consultation, here are the activities that we can come up with based on our consultation, and so on and so forth. And of course, the output is to attain or exceed the target for the outcome indicators. So very simple, but the actual program was much more complex. This is just a simple way of showing the input to activity to output to outcome, how they are all interrelated. And you can use the language in the absolute priority and all the activities to create something like this. Next slide. Okay, so this is another example of, let's see, part of my screen is covered. Okay, this is another example of input output short-term, long-term outcome. It's different from the first one I showed you. It's a logic model, You don't have to follow this. And again, the early education literacy success is not something we're talking about in the NIA we went over for this program. It's just an example of an education service and how that can be used. So in this one, let's see. In this one, the output could be, for example, up to 10 MOUs. I'm going with the first line on their input, 10 MOUs with schools. You have 10 schools, you've got 10 MOUs, and that's your input. That's where you're starting with. Your output could be, creating 10 new preschool classrooms in TEA, tribal education. Maybe that's what your output you want to have. Your short-term outcome, not that you have to have short-term, long-term, but here's an example. Short-term outcome could be some sort of percentage, could be 100% of preschool classrooms to meet all health and safety guidance requirements. So just pay attention to your short-term long-term outcomes. If you mention a percentage, you want to be realistic, whether you can make it or not in the time you have. I'm just using 100% here. You don't have to. You can do some other percentage if you wanted to, but it's just to show you what your short-term outcome could be. And the long-term outcome could be something like an increase of 30% in available preschool seats, for example. I'm just addressing the first one on this slide. And we're not going to get into every single one of them, but that's just an example of what you could do with a logic model if you chose, one of the 12 activities. And of course, the example I'm using here is not one of the 12 activities. It's just an example. Next slide. Okay, so in this one, that's example number 3. We're using post-secondary math bootcamp. Again, it's not one of the things you're going to choose from. It's just an example. And it's basically the same kind of input, output, short-term, long-term outcome. Excuse me. So in this one, we're going to go with the second row, starting with the input. You've got, say, 10 tutors. You've got 10 tutorial sessions, right? And that's your input. That's where you want to start. And your output could be something like enrolling 30 seniors in person and 40 online participants per session of tutoring. So if you've got 10 tutorial sessions and 10 tutors, and your output, you want it to be something like that, 30 seniors in person and 40 online per tutoring session. And then your short-term outcome could be something like that by the end of 24 months, 80% of students successfully complete their first college math course with a grade C or above. That's a very specific kind of breakdown of what you think your short-term outcome could be. And of course, if you have a long-term outcome, that could be something like an increase in the number of Native American students successfully completing degrees in STEM fields by 2% by the end of year 3. So that's how this thing works. And you've got colors here, some dark orange, some light, and the colors are being used to show you transition from one to the other, from, I think, output to short-term, long-term outcome. That's how these colors work. Next slide. So what we're going to do now is go over the linkage. And I've got a couple of examples as far as the linkage is concerned. I want to start with the quality of project design. Remember, project design is the total points for project design. That's one of the 4 selection criteria is 50. And that's half the points you can earn through the review process. So here, what we're doing is to show the linkage between the 3 components listed here using project design selection criteria 2II, the extent to which the proposed project encourages parental involvement. Parental involvement, that's 10 points. To do that, let's see. It basically, the example here shows how to align an element in the selection criteria with a budget you created, under your application budget part, pardon me. You created in your application to demonstrate how the elements you selected under the absolute priority will be planned and budgeted for. Here, I'd like to emphasize the importance of linking your proposed budget with your proposed project narrative. So you've got a budget narrative, you've got budget numbers, but you also have a project narrative, and you have to marry the 2 of them together to make sure they basically are speaking the same language here. Be sure to have a well-developed budget narrative that explains how the budget you propose links to the elements in the absolute priority. Remember, we went over the absolute priority and what that is. And the selection criteria, both. For example, if parents are involved, and here you're choosing parental engagement, right? If parents are involved, will there be meetings in person or virtual? Will there be other activities that include parents of children being served? What are these activities? How often do they occur? And are they budgeted for? Those are the kind of a few questions that come to mind when you're considering, say, parental engagement and how it's budgeted and formulated in your project narrative. Next slide. Okay, and here's a logic model using the project design, quality of project. And I just wanted to show the linkage first and show you the logic model that could be applied as far as the project design is concerned. Again, I'm focusing on this because it's half the points you can earn for total points you can earn for an application. So it's important to kind of focus on this a little bit. And in this example, we talk about the linkage. Well, we talked about the linkage in the previous slide. And in this slide, we're using a logic model with the components from the previous slide to show how a logic model can be used to map out the linkage between selection criteria, which is project design in this case, application, and that was part 5, the budget narrative, and absolute priority element. In this case, it was family literacy services, family engagement, pardon me. So in this example, so your input would be the part 5 of the budget narrative. This is your project design. Part 5 is your budget narrative. So you develop your budget narrative, and then the 6121C activity, we're going to focus on the family services for now. That would be your activity that you selected. Your output is something like the extent to which the proposed project encourages parental involvement. And remember, when you're budgeting, you need to show what that is, whether they're going to be in-person meeting, virtual, how much, how often, that sort of thing. And the outcome is basically the quality of project design. You read the project design, what it says, whether it is covered completely here in your logic model. So next slide. Again, these are just examples. It's not exactly what you follow, but you have to follow a logic model and then put it into practice here. So again, we're going back to the linkage example, this time with the quality of management plan. We're not going to go into a logic model for this. I just wanted to put this up because management plan is important. It entails so many different things that you need to actually do a little work on it, even though it has only maybe 15 points. In this example, for the quality of management plan, we use selection criteria 2I, and that's the adequacy of the management plan to achieve the objectives of the proposed project on time and within budget, including clearly defined responsibilities, timelines, and milestones for accomplishing project tasks. You notice how much is under 2I. There's a lot in there: timelines, project tasks, responsibilities, all that stuff. And we just want to illustrate the linkage between that and the proposed management plan, budget narrative under the application requirement, and the program requirement, which kicks in, by the way, your program requirement kicks in if you're awarded within 6 months after the date of the award. Not now, but later. So when you're looking at this, I want you to consider some questions, and I'm just throwing these out there for you to kind of think about. Will the objectives of the proposed project to be completed is going to be on time and within budget? Will the project be on time and within budget? Is the proposed management plan reflected in the budget and project narrative portion of the application requirement? And a few more questions to consider. Is there sufficient time committed to complete the plan in place? Another question could be, is this reflected in the personnel budget category of your detailed budget? For example, if in your management plan, the project director work indicates a full-time position, then the itemized budget related to that position should reflect the same full-time position and comparable salary and fringe benefits. So you don't want to mention something one place but not follow it through. You need to kind of make that connection and give full information. Another question would be, does your budget clearly explain how ARPA funds will be used to accomplish the proposed plan? Another question, is this reflected in your proposed timeline? Is this explained in your proposed project narrative? Those are the questions you want to kind of ask yourself and kind of go over to make sure you've tied all the loose ends. Now, directly administering education programs requires sufficient staffing to complete the task. In addition to a project director, you may also want to think about how many other staff your proposed project may need to carry out direct administration and other activities consistent with the proposed purposes of the ARPA program. Again, these are just examples of how these key components are intertwined when developing your proposed project narrative. Next slide. So this is a blank, simple blank logic model example that I included here. Doesn't mean you need to use this. It's just a blank one in case you want to practice something later. But there are many options when it comes to choosing a logic model. And we introduced a few examples here, but there are many to choose from. You don't have to go with any of the ones we showed you here. These were just examples only. But you must include a logic model, again, to take advantage of the full points under project design. Here's a blank one in case you want to practice, but you're not limited to this. Next slide. Now we're going to take some questions if we have time. Do we have time to take questions?
Yes, we do have time for a couple of questions. The first being, we had a question come up about what is being used to qualify an application as a tribe. Was it a BIA federally recognized list and or tribe as defined in the Indian Self-Determination Act or something else? And the legal team provided a response that I posted in the chat, but I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to see, which is TEAs of federally recognized or state recognized tribes are eligible to apply. Federally recognized means listed on the Department of Interior's list, which is published annually in the Federal Register. State recognized means recognized as a tribe by the state government, even if that tribe is not recognized by the federal government. So we had that one. And then we did have another question about, will the Department of Ed assist grantees with the agreements as FERPA is an issue? Will there be a template? And the response for that one is that, that we are going to be providing technical assistance to grantees to help you meet the requirement to have a data sharing agreement after award. But it is a good idea to start thinking about this now when you're applying and how you'll go about that process. And then finally, we had a question about the recording, and we're going to discuss that more in these upcoming resource slides.
Thank you, Sarah, for going over those questions. Thank you. All right, very good. All right, we're getting to the end. Just bear with me a few more minutes. And in this slide, we're just doing a very quick over of what the grants.gov page looks like. That's all we're going to do here. Just showing you what you can click. You can search it by using an identifier like Indian resilience. That's kind of the short version, a keyword to put in to bring up the full name that's highlighted in yellow here. And when that comes up, then you can click the highlighted yellow and then the package that's circled in red to apply. You have to follow the instructions in grants.gov to do your application, and there's a website here listed a link that you can go to do your grants.gov application process. Next slide. Great. And so what happens after you send in an application, it's successfully submitted and all? What happens next? I just want to touch base very quickly on what happens. It doesn't entail everything, but it just gives you an idea of what's going to happen. So all applications all eligible applications that were successfully submitted through grants.gov will be screened for eligibility. All applications that were successfully submitted through grants.gov will be screened for eligibility. Notice of eligibility will be sent by email. All eligible applications will be reviewed by a peer review panel of independent outside peer reviewers. Normally we have several panels, and each panel is normally made up of 3 independently selected outside peer reviewers. Applications will be independently read and scored by the 3 peer reviewers per panel. And then there's also panel discussions, several discussions. All peer-reviewed applications will be rank ordered by OIE based on the points they received during the review process. That's basically what I just wanted to give you an idea of what happens. Also to mention the fact that we have a very compressed review window. I mean, the application deadline is September 13. We have a very quick review process. And so it would be extremely helpful, and you can be a player in this, and the way you can help is that provide the information in your application, the way that the reviewers can find the information easily. By that, I mean, there is a process to this application. The application has parts. Try to follow the instructions in grants.gov and put the parts where they should go. And remember, I said several times, if you are claiming novice for, selecting activities or absolute priority, you just mentioned that in the abstract section of the project abstract section. That way, reviewers can find it very quickly and move on to the rest of your application. You can, so that's basically what I wanted to share with. Next slide. Here's your deadline, the time. Don't wait until the last minute to do it. Try to submit as early as possible. I know there's a lot of work to be done. Some of you have already notified how much work there is and so forth, but that's how it is. Creating a new program is also a lot of work, but we want you to have access to it so you can, do what you can and take advantage of the opportunity. So submit as early as you can. Don't wait until the last few days or hours to submit. Next slide. So, so there's going to be a review of resources, and I'm going to ask Synergy, Sarah, or someone to go over the resources with you. Sarah.
Thanks, Shala. So we do want to go over a few resources that are available to you to help you with your application. So first of all, the notice inviting applications became available July 13th. You can see the link here where you can access that directly, which is also in the chat, or you can just go to grants.gov and search by this funding opportunity number and it will pop up. There's also the link here for the system for awards management. These are all links that you'll need for your application process. There are some additional resources. So you can access the requirements from 2 CFR Part 200, generally known as uniform guidance, at the 4 links listed below. Those will also be placed in the chat box, but remember, you have the PDF, and if you haven't gotten that yet, we'll post it again at the end of the webinar where you can have those links as well. We did have some questions about logic models and about resources regarding logic models. So we have a number of resources to help you create logic models, learn more about logic models. Those are all going to be available on the OIE website. And so over in the chat box, you can see the direct link to where those resources are going to be located. Additionally, we do have video tutorials for grant applicants. You can access those at this top link. And then if you are not able to attend the first pre-application webinar, or maybe you just want to review that information, remember that the recording and the PDF of that webinar is up on the OIE website as well. The recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint from this webinar will be up by end of day tomorrow. And then the frequently asked questions will be up shortly. It may be about a week before those are up because we have to compile those and get those ready, but those will be up at that same link. So that's a good link to keep, is this bottom run right here that ends with how to apply, because that's where all your application updates and competition updates will come in. If you have questions, you can always reach out to Shala, who is your ARP-AIR program lead and competition manager, as well as Dr. Donna Davis-Burns, the group lead. Again, that website where you can find all of your competition information, as well as the Office of Indian Ed joined Twitter this year. So you can keep up with the latest and greatest through OIE if you're on Twitter at OIE Indian Ed. We have just a couple of minutes to be able to go back and do a few of our last questions.
Go ahead.
So 4 questions. Let's start with, could you clarify the page limit for the abstract? The NIA says 1 page. The instruction package says 2 pages double spaced.
You want to go with the grants.gov application package instructions. That's what you need to follow.
Thank you. And the next one is the word tribe being used in place of reservation or council? My tribe resides on 9 separate reservations. We would only be applying for our reservation TEA, not for all of our tribal reservations.
That's a very good question. And that's a question that we're going to have to research and get back to you. I don't know if my legal team has a response to that, but we will definitely get back to you.
Great, thank you. Then we did have a couple other eligibility questions. We had someone who asked if nonprofits were eligible.
No, they're not.
Okay. And would being a Bureau of Indian Affairs 638 JOM fund recipient meet the definition of a TEA?
I'm not familiar with that definition. We're going to have to research it and get back to you.
Great. Are tribal Head Starts eligible?
Again, go back to eligible as a what? TEA. You have to go back to the definition of what a TEA is. Remember, we talked about, yes, exactly. Thank you for putting it up. That it has to be an agency, department, instrumentality, which means an office or something, one or more federally recognized, state recognized Indian tribes that is primarily responsible for supporting tribal students' elementary and secondary education. So elementary and secondary education would be their primary responsibility. Is that the case with the entity you mentioned? I wouldn't know that, and if you're not sure, you may want to go back and research it to make sure what they actually do provide.
Great. The next one is their reservation has 2 TEAs, one that's funded by the CDE OIE and one that is funded by the council. Would both TEAs qualify to apply?
You have to look at the definition here again. Which one of the 2 TEAs is primarily responsible for supporting tribal students' elementary and secondary education? That's the definition that you apply. There are offices that are called TEAs that may or may not be doing all these activities, but this is the definition that's in the NIA. So you have to go with that definition to see which one of the 2 actually apply.
Great. And then last eligibility question. I'd like to be certain we're eligible before doing the work to complete the application. Is there someone I can email to check this?
We don't determine your eligibility outside of what we just covered. I really strongly recommend that you read the notice inviting application in its entirety. Like I said, the 2 webinars that we did are just basically they don't cover everything that's in the NIA, so you need to read that. And eligibility is something that needs to be determined by the entity that you represent. So we do give you the definition of who can apply as a group or individually, and that's his tribal educational agencies, and we defined what that means. If you're not sure whether you fit that definition, then you need to go back and consult with your tribe or the tribal entity office that you deal with to make sure that you're not putting too much, working on something that you may or may not be eligible for.
Great. Thank you, Shala. And then this appears to be our last question. If I've missed your question, we do have about 1 more minute if you're a speed typer. So I think our last question is going to be, can one TEA submit 2 proposals for consideration?
That's a very good question. If you're one TEA submitting 2 proposals, one of the questions that come to mind is, would you be doing it for the same tribe? And so in that case, it's something that we're going to have to basically research. I need more information why you would want to put 2 proposals for the same program. So if you could provide us with more information why you want to do 2, then we'll look into it to see if it's potentially possible for you to do so.
Great, thank you. So yeah, if you could provide a little bit more context for your question, and then we'll include that in the FAQ document. So that concludes our Q&A. And so I'll turn it back over to Shala to wrap for the day.
Great, thank you so much. I just want to thank everyone for hanging on and for attending this webinar, and wish you all the success. Have a pleasant day. Thank you.